the uptake of these measures, because households will be allowed to relax credit constraints, and so if you allow a household to spread a cost of 100, 200, 300 rupees over a year, they may be much more willing to buy the bed.
The people in the village, they are financially not that sound. The BPL category people, due to the financial constraint and due to ignorance also sometimes, they do not have mosquito nets.
What we'd like to be able to do is to have different sorts of loan products for each type of insecticide-treated net, and also for the actual sequence of retreatments. There are sort of three goals of the project, broadly speaking. The first one, and the most directly relevant to microfinance, is to see to what extent we can use microfinance to provide health interventions like insecticide-treated nets. The other sort of broader aim of this project is to try to understand how people think about health interventions in these kinds of situations, what kinds of information, what kind of interventions can we effect to try and understand how people take these decisions, and how can we, in some sense, effect some sort of behavioral change in this environment. And the third goal, which is sort of the most straightforward in some sense, is a program evaluation sort of goal, which is to try and understand and to try and quantify really what are the effects as rigorously as possible of providing insecticide-treated nets via microfinance to outcomes such as health, or also things like days lost due to work or schooling, medical expenditure. While there are very well documented studies that look at the effect of ITNs on reductions in mortality and morbidity, the link from there to actual improvements in income, expenditure, or household welfare more generally defined, I think is quite an important issue, and certainly it certainly is something that households are going to take into account when they're going to decide whether or not to invest money in an ITN. And so trying to actually put a number to that, I think, would actually be quite useful.
गोटे मसारी अछि त मसारी टांगु छी के बे
नाही तो आई
के नै लगा काई नै लगा कारण का
गोटे मसारी अछि डबल आ पाखे पाखे तो सुई छन बोले के ना होटल लगे असुविधा
खर्चा कितना होता है आपको वो जो प्रॉब्लम्स है और हेल्थ के लिए एक वर्ष में
अंदाज
किछि त ठीक ठिकना नहीं जत्ते बड़ा है ना से
को तते अंदाज
फिर भी 5 थर 7 थर दे जाय
केते 5 7 थर वर्ष को बोले थरे गले केते खर्चा हो
थरे गले 1000 टका सब डंगा जदी जणे बेड रे जदी पड़ी गला आहुरी भी खर्चा हो जाय.
We know that bouts of malaria are typically associated with several days of schooling or work lost. And this means that if you have malaria and you lose 3 or 4 days of work, for instance, and you are a daily wage laborer, this may reduce your income, and reduced income may reduce the ability to pay as a consequence.
The bottom line then for BISWA would be that it would enable them to improve their repayment rates.
We are also looking at the health aspects, because if you will not see the health aspects, then the credit deepening, the credit absorption capacity will gradually decrease, and that's why we agreed with Center for Microfinance to do this work.
So in that sense, BISWA as an MFI will benefit a lot more, because now they can do high volume loans, and the transaction costs obviously will reduce, so it makes business sense for them.
I think there's a lot of renewed attention on malaria in the past maybe 10 or 15 years to do with how to deal with malaria, and in part I think it's come about because of the failure of the global eradication of malaria program that sort of people pretty much gave up on in the 70s, and I think also the increased realization that there's been a lot of money spent on trying to find a malaria vaccine, while there are a lot of relatively cheap interventions that people can undertake that have the potential at least of reducing malaria morbidity drastically. Now, to go from saying that we actually have available cheap interventions that can reduce malaria mortality and morbidity to actually the adoption of these interventions by populations on a large scale is actually a very, very difficult question. So while it's true that ITNs are relatively cheap and have documented health benefits in terms of reducing malaria morbidity, to actually achieve the kind of targets that the malaria experts talk about is really a very difficult thing to do without having some understanding of how people take these decisions to adopt these kind of nets or not. So I think that in a best case scenario, this project would sort of contribute to that conversation and try and at least have some understanding of how we can enable households or poor households to actually adopt these interventions and then potentially think about whether these can be scaled up.
In addition to these questions which have been illustrated in the movie, one thing that the recent crisis in Andhra Pradesh in the microfinance sector has revealed is that we know very little about the microfinance sector, even about things that we were never questioning. How do MFIs operate? What are the strategies of the loan officers to get back their loans? What do people use loans for? This last question is important not because microfinance institutions should lend only for productive purposes, something that we often hear, but because it is important to know what clients are borrowing for in order to design the right products for what the clients need. The role of the Center for Microfinance is to go beyond anecdotal evidence and to collect rigorous data on the microfinance sector. We conduct both short-term studies and long-term studies in order to answer two questions. How can we help expand the access of microfinance? And how can we help improve the quality of existing microfinancial services?